Hello everyone. So the next program in chapter 5 is Paint's Job Estimator. Right, so a painting company has determined that for every 115 square feet of wall space, 1 gallon of paint and 8 hours of labor will be required. The company charges $18 per hour for labor. Write a program that allows the user to enter the number of rooms to be painted and the price of the paint per gallon. Now, it should also ask for the square feet of wall space in each room. The program should have methods that return the following data. So the number of gallons of paint required, the hours of labor required, the cost of the paint, the labor charges, the total cost of the paint job. Then it should display the data on the screen. So basically we've been given some parameters, and based on these parameters we're going to use, we're going to calculate some charges and some charges, but I'll explain as we start writing the program. So for now, let's just go ahead and start. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a class, and I'll call it Job Estimator. And then I'll go ahead and create the main method. Sorry, typing is not the best. Okay, so over here in the question it says the program should have methods that return the following data. So that means we have to create methods for these. Okay, but let's read through the question and then take our time and figure out exactly what this question needs. Okay, so like I mentioned in the previous chapter 5 videos, some people create their methods below the main method. They start creating like the public static, their methods below the main method, and it still works. As soon as you create your methods, they are available and they can be called. Okay, here, as soon as you create your methods in this class, even though you created them below the main method, when you call them a main, they should still be available. It doesn't matter if it's below the main method. But for me, I mix them around. Sometimes I create the methods above the main method. Sometimes I create it below the main method. Over here, I'm just going to go ahead and create it above the main method. Just so you understand it, it will also work if you create the method below the main method. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create them above the main method, and it should still work. All right, so let's see. A painting company has determined that for every 115 square feet of wall space, 1 gallon of paint and 8 hours of labor will be required. So it tells us this: write a program that allows the user to enter the number of rooms to be painted. So let's start with that. Write a program that allows the user to enter the number of rooms to be painted. So let's ask the user to enter the number of rooms, that are going to be painted. So since we're going to be using some kind of feature, feature to ask for user input, we need to use one of the features in Java to ask for user input. So we have a couple of options. We have the J option pane and we have the scanner. For this program, I'm just going to use the J option pane, just because for programs like these, it just looks nicer. So I'm going to choose to use the J option pane. You can still use the scanner if you want, but I'm going to choose to use the J option pane. So to use the J option pane, you have to import it into the program so that this program can have access to the J option pane class. And to import it, you type import javax.swing.j option pane this way. So once you've typed this statement, once you've done this, you've basically imported the J option pane class into this program, so this program has access to it. And with the J option pane class, you don't have to declare an object. Unlike the scanner class, with the scanner class you have to declare an object. But with the J option pane, you don't have to declare an object. You just go ahead and use it. So instead of just typing the statement, instead of just asking the user to enter in the number of rooms to be painted in the main method, since we're dealing with methods in chapter 5, I'm going to go ahead and create a method just to do that. I'm going to create a method just to ask the user to enter the number of rooms to be painted. So it's going to be a public static method. Public because the the method is going to be available to code outside this class, okay? And it's static because it's a method that belongs to this particular class. Now this method is not going to return anything, so I'm going to type in void over here. It's going to return void. It's going to return nothing. And I'm going to call this method, actually it's going to return something, sorry. it's going to return something. It's going to get the number of rooms from the user and then return it. So we're going to return something. So since it's going to return, in this case, it's a number of rooms to be entered. It's going to be an integer, either 1, 2, 3 rooms, 4 rooms. So it's an integer. So in this case, it's going to get the number of rooms from the user, which is an integer, and it's going to return that. Sorry, it's going to return that integer. Okay, so it's going to return an int, public static int. I'm going to call the method gets number of rooms. And gets number of rooms is not going to accept any parameter, so I'm not going to define any. Sorry, it's not going to accept any argument, so I'm not going to define any parameter. And what get number of rooms is going to do is it's going to ask the user to enter the number of rooms. I'm going to go ahead and use the G-option panes, show inputs dialog. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm going to use the G-option panes show input dialog method to ask the user to enter. Please enter the number of rooms. The number of rooms that are going to be painted. Like this. Now, the G-option panes show input to dialog method. Okay, whatever the user types is always returned as a string. Now, in this case, we are asking the user to enter the number of rooms. So the user is very likely to type in an integer. But if the user even types an integer, because it's, if the user types in an integer, the G-option panes show input dialog method always returns a string. So if the user types a number, for example, which is an integer, let's say 5 rooms, it's going to return that 5 as a string instead of a number. But we can't use strings in calculations. We can't use them in calculations to do what we have to do with them, or what we have to do with that number in this program. We can't really do that. So we have to convert the string that is returned from the G-option panes show input dialog method into an integer, so we can use it in calculations. So first of all, I'm going to create a variable called, it's going to be a string variable, and I'm going to call user input string. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm going to call user input string. And user input string is going to be a variable that stores the initial string. Okay, that is returned from that's returned by the G-option panes show input dialog method. And then later on we can convert it to an integer, because by default the show input dialog method always returns a string. So we are storing that string here in show input string, and now we are going to go ahead and convert that, converts the contents in user input string to an integer. To do that, we are going to use one of the methods in Java's wrapper classes. It's called, or it's written this way: integer dot parse int, like this. So basically what we are doing is we are parsing, or we are converting, we are passing what we are going to pass into these parentheses. We are passing the content in user input string into an integer. We are passing the content in user input string into an integer. And once we do that, we need a place to store it. We need a variable to store it in. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable up here, and I'm going to call it, this is going to be the number of rooms that the user is going to enter. It's going to be the number of rooms that are going to be painted. So I'm going to create a variable, and it's going to be an integer. And I'm going to call it user number of rooms. And once the content stored in user input string has been converted to an integer, we are going to store that integer in user number of rooms here. Now, once we have the user number of rooms, okay, converted to an integer, stored in user number of rooms here, we can then go ahead and return it. So I'm going to go ahead and return user number of rooms here. So that's what this method is going to do. Now we can try to combine some of these things on one line, but I wanted to break it out. In the previous program, I mentioned trying to combine some of them into one, like all these 5 statements, for example, we can convert it into one line. But then I don't want to confuse anyone, so I've decided to stick with separating things out this way, and then maybe you can put it together on your own, or maybe once in a while we'll put it together just so we can learn. But for now, I'm just breaking it down like we've always done, just so that we see how the different parts are working. Okay. All right. So now this is what's going to happen in the get number of rooms. Okay, it's going to ask the user to enter the number of rooms, and then we're going to return the number of rooms out of the function to whatever statements that's or whatever line statements that is calling this method. All right, so now we're done with one method. Over here, the program said the question said write a program that allows the user to enter the number of rooms to be painted. It also says and the price of the paint per gallon. So let's create another method. We're just going to just ask for the price of paint per gallon, right? Sorry. So I'm going to create another public static method. Since it's going to accept the price from the user and return it, it's going to return a double, because that's the price, a double amount. So it can be $25.50, 25.50, and that's why I'm setting the return type to double. And I'm going to call this method. This method is asking over here. It's asking for the price of the paint per gallon. So I'm going to say get paint price. I'm going to call it get paint price, and it's not going to accept any argument. So I'm not going to define any parameter here. And what this method is going to do is it's going to do something very similar to this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it. It's going to ask the user it's going to first define a string. This time we're not going to define an integer, because we're accepting the over here the price of the paints per gallon, and the price is going to be a double. So I'm going to go ahead and create a double variable instead, and it's going to be double. I'm going to call it price of paint. That's the variable that's going to store the price of the paint. We are going to accept the price from the user. So I'm going to change this label to please enter the price of the paint. And the price of the paint is now going to be stored. Initially, it's going to return as a string, so I'm going to store it in user input string. And instead of converting it to an integer, this time around we want to convert it to a double. So it's going to be double.parse double. Okay, not integer.parse int. Double.parse double. We are passing the content of user input string into a double and storing it in price of paint, because that's what the user is going to type initially into user input string. We are converting what's in user input string to a double, price of paint. And then once we have the price of paint, we can go ahead and return price of paint like this. Okay, so we're breaking things down, seeing exactly how it works. Okay, so now we're done with 2 methods. All right, so it says it should also ask for the square feet of wall space in each room. Okay, it should also ask for the square feet of wall space in each room. All right, so this program says for every 115 square feet of wall space, 1 gallon of paint and 8 hours of labor will be required. All right, so let's keep that in mind. It also says write a program that allows the user to enter the number of rooms. Okay, we are asking for the number of rooms, and over here it also says it should ask for the square feet of wall space in each room. So when they ask, for example, when the user types in 4 rooms, we have to go ahead and ask the user how many or what's the square feet in room 1, what's the square feet in room 2, what's the square feet in room 3, what's the square feet in room 4. We're going to ask the totals, the square feet in each room, and then add it all up to get the total square feet. And then based on these parameters, for every 115 square feet of, you need 1 gallon and 8 hours of labor. Based on these parameters, we can go ahead and calculate whatever they're telling us to calculate, right? But for now, we need to get the total square feet. They're going to enter the number of rooms. We're going to ask them how many square feet in each room. We're going to add them all up and get the total square feet, and then calculate whatever they're telling us to calculate. So over here it states it should also ask for the square feet of wall space in each room. Okay, if we ask them for a number of rooms, we will have the number of rooms, so we can basically pass that number to the next method we're going to create. But I don't want to get into that. Let me just do it and then we'll see it. Right, so let's go ahead and create a method that's going to ask for the square feet in each room. Based on the number of rooms they entered, we're going to ask them for the square feet, the total square feet in each room. Okay, the wall space. That's the term they used in this here, wall space. But it's going to be basically in square feet. So we're going to ask them the square feet. Okay, the square feet of wall space in room 1, in room 2, in room 3, based on the number of rooms they entered. So I'm going to create a method over here. I'm going to call it. It's going to be a public static, and this method is going to return the total square feet. Okay, this is not going to return the square feet in one room. It's going to basically calculate. It's going to basically figure out or ask the user for the square feet in each room, add them all up, and then return the total square feet of all the rooms together. Okay, so it's a public static method. I'm going to call it get total. We can call it get total wall space. But we have to remember it's in square feet. Okay, but I'm just going to call it get total wall space. And get total wall space is going to take in an argument. So get total wall space first of all needs the total number of rooms. So if it's 5 rooms or 6 rooms, and then in this method we're going to use a loop to go through each room and ask for how many square feet of wall space is in each room. So this method will need. Hold on, we didn't specify the return type here. I didn't specify the return type here. Now this method is going to return the total wall space. Okay, and the total wall space is going to be a double, because the user can say there are. Let me see. The user can enter, let's say, 114.5 square feet. Okay, the user can enter a double. So I'm going to return a double. Double total. The total wall space we're going to return can be a double. So the return type I'm setting to a double. So public static double get total wall space. It needs the total number of rooms. So I'm going to define a parameter. The total number of rooms is going to be an integer. So int, I'm going to define. It's going to need a total number of rooms. So total number of rooms. It's going to. I'm not going to call it total number of rooms. I'm going to call it number of rooms. It's going to need the number of rooms to work with. And in this get total wall space method, we're going to create a loop, a for loop, that is going to loop through all the rooms and then ask for the wall space in square feet in each room. So I'm going to define an int variable called room, and I'm going to initialize it to 1. So basically I want to start from room 1 and then go all the way to the last room. So for int room is equal to 1, as long as this room is less than or equal to the number of rooms that the user just passed as an argument to this method. As long as the room is less than or equal to number of rooms, and before you come up and test this condition of the loop again, add 1 to room. So we are starting from 1, and as long as room is less than the total rooms, do what's in the loop and come and check again. Is the room as long as the room is less than or equal to the total number of rooms, do what's in the loop, and before you come back up and check this condition again, add 1 to room, and then keep checking. Is room less than or equal to total rooms? So basically, this room is looping through it's looping through all the rooms. It's going through all the rooms, starting from 1 and doing something. It's going through room 1 and then does something, and then room is incremented by 1, and then now room becomes 2 the second time around. So it's checking to see if the current room, okay, so I'm going to actually change this variable to and call it current room, just because it makes sense that way. So I'm going to say the current room, we're going to start from from room 1 all the way to the last. So when we start, the current room will be 1, and then we'll move to 2, and then the current room will be room 2, and so on. So we're starting from room 1. As long as the current room is less than or equal to the number of rooms, do what's in the loop. Before you come back up and check to see if this condition is true, add 1 to room, and then check to see if condition is true. So it's always making sure that the room that it's at right now is not more than the total number of rooms. You want to start from room 1 all the way to the last room, all the way to the total number of rooms. So this loop is basically going through each room. So when you get to each room, what we want to do is ask the user to enter the total square feet of wall space in each room. So I'm going to go ahead and call the GOption panes show input dialog over here like this. I'm supposed to type it, but I'm just copying. Sorry. All right. So GOption pane, let's show input dialog, and I'm going to now say, please enter the total or the square feet of wall space in room. Now I have the current room stored in the current room variable, so I can go ahead and use it, because each time this loop is iterating, it's going to keep track of the current room. If it's in room 2, this current room is going to be 2. So I'm just saying, please enter the square feet of wall space in room current room, the value stored in current room. And then once we ask the user that the user is going to type in something, we need a place to store it. So I'm going to go ahead and define a variable above this for loop over here in the get total wall space method. So over here, we're asking for the square feet of wall space in room. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and declare a variable. It's going to be a double because the square feet, the user can type in 27.5 square feet in room 1, 27.8 square feet in room 2. So the user can type in a double for the square feet that he or she is entering. So I'm going to go ahead and define a variable. I'm going to call it double square feet. Okay, square feet. I wanted to make it long and say square feet of wall space, but square feet works. And square feet is a variable. Let's see. Square feet is the variable that's going to hold what the user types for each room, right? Now we also need to keep track of the total square feet. So I'm going to go ahead and declare another variable called total square feet. This is the total square feet of all the rooms together. Initially, it's 0. We're going to add to this variable and then keep track of the total square feet. Initially, it's 0. So anytime you, for example, get the square feet for each room, I typed this wrong with square feet. Oops, this is even worse. Square feet. All right. So it's going to ask the user, for example, what's the square feet of wall space for room 1. The user is going to type in square feet. Anytime you get the square feet, let's add it to the total square feet. So let's keep track of how many. Let's add it to the total square feet. So by the time this loop is done, we're going to have all the total square feet stored in this total square feet variable. So anytime you get the square feet, total square feet over here is going total square feet that I declared above. Sorry. Is going to equal to what's already stored in total square feet plus the square feet that the user just typed. Okay, so anytime the user gets the square feet, the total square feet now is going to be equal to what's already stored in total square feet plus the square feet. Now you can write this in a shorthand version as total square feet plus equals square feet. That means that what you're adding to total square feet is equal to square feet. Okay, what you're adding to total square feet is equal to square feet. So get the square feet for room 1, add it to total square feet. Get the square feet for room 2, add it to total square feet. And then once we have the total square feet, by the time this loop is done, this whole loop is done, we're going to have the total square feet in its variable. Once we have the total square feet, we want to go ahead and return it. Return total square feet. Now, the name of the method is called get total wall space, right? Total wall space. So if you want, we can actually change this. We can change this variable to wall space, okay? But I'm just keeping it as I'll change it to wall space. But the reason why I named it as square feet is because in the units are in square feet. I don't want to confuse anyone by saying wall space. All right. But get total wall space is going to store the. Over here, we're asking for the square feet of wall space. So you can name this as wall space if you want. As long as you know that it's in square feet, then you're fine. So I think I'm going to go ahead and change this to, let's see. I'm going to leave the names as these, although it may sound a bit funny, but I'm going to leave the names as these, just so I want us to know that this is what we are getting. We're getting the square feet for each room, and this is the total square feet. Okay, but you can name it as wall space, and then total wall space if you want. I'm going to leave it this way. This is going to return the total square feet. It's the same as return the total wall space. I don't want you to get confused, but just know that this is going to return the total wall space in square feet. Okay, so now we're done with 3 methods. All right. So let's see what other things we have to do. We have to create these methods as well. All right. So we have to calculate the number of gallons of paint required. The number of gallons of paint required. Now let's figure out how to calculate that. This question says a paint company has determined that for every 115 square feet. See, that's why I named this as total square feet, so we can know that that's the square feet. All right. So for every 115 square feet of wall space, 1 gallon of paint is required. We are not interested. We are interested in the gallons of paint required. Okay, we're interested in the gallons of paint required. So, I'm sorry. We're interested in the gallons of paint required. So let's calculate that. So for every 115 square feet of wall space, 1 gallon of paint is 1 gallon of paint and 8 hours of labor is required. We're interested in paint for now, not hours, just paint. So 115 square feet, we get 1 gallon. So what if the total wall space is 200 square feet? Okay, then we can basically calculate. If for 115 we are getting 1, then 215 we are getting more. So we're basically going to do some calculation then. I'm going to explain that right now. But first of all, let's create a method that's going to do that. So I'm going to create a public static method that is going to calculate the number of gallons of paint required. So I'm going to say calculate gallons, and I'm going to make again these names long. For me, I like to do that sometimes, but if it's too long for you, please feel free to change it. So I'm going to call this calculate gallons of paint required. Okay, paint. You can say calculate gallons of paint. I'm just going to say gallons of paint required. Just it's a long name. It's a long name. But when you call it, it's still going to work. I just like to do this sometimes. Not sometimes, most of the time, just so, I keep the program, very understandable. But if it's too long for you, feel free to make it short. But I like to do this. All right. So calculate gallons of paint required. Now, so let me just explain it here with a comment here. Okay, so over here we know that for every 115 square feet, we get 1 gallon. So 115, okay, 115 square feet is equal to one gallon, right? And then after we've calculated our the total square feet, after we've added up all the square feet in each room and gotten the total square feet, we can say, if for example, assuming that the user entered, okay, first let me just put total square feet here. Total square feet is going to be equal to, we don't know yet, all right? If 115 square feet is equal to 1 gallon, then total square feet is going to, we don't know the number of gallons yet. So if assuming the total square feet is going to be equal to 200, if it's 200, so if 115 is equal to 1 gallon, then we know 200 square feet now is going to give us more gallons, because 200 is more than 115. So 200 is going to give us more gallons, and this is like a ratio and proportion problem. And the way ratio and proportion problems work is this: if this is going to give us more gallons, then the lesser of these two numbers divides. And what I mean by the lesser of these two numbers divides is 115 is a less number, the lesser number of these two. So it divides. So that means that this is going to be 200 divided by 115. The lesser number goes down. Okay, it divides. That's what I mean by that. 200 is going to be 200 divided by 115, and then you end up multiplying by what's on the right. Okay, so 115 square feet is equal to 1. If 115 square feet is equal to 1, 200 square feet, we know it's going to give us more. So if more, less divides. They say if more, less divides. And they say if less, more divides. Now, because this is going to give us more, then less divides. So less divides means the lesser of these two goes under this. So it's going to be 200 divided by 115 times 1. Now, keep in mind that we are dividing by 115. Okay. Now, assuming the total square feet, well, let's say 23. Okay. In that case, if 115 square feet is equal to 1 gallon, then 23 is going to obviously give us less gallons, because 23 is less than 115. 115 gives us a 123 is going to give us less gallons. And ratio and proportion is if less, then more divides. Okay. So if more, less divides. If less, more divides. And over here, because 23 is going to give us less gallons, if less, then more divides. And what I mean by more divides is the bigger number of these two, more, the more number, okay, the bigger number, more divides. The bigger number goes under 23, it divides, okay, it goes under 23, and you end up multiplying by what's on the right. So in this case, it's going to be 23 divided by 115 times 1. Now, keep in mind that no matter the value of this number, we're always dividing by 115 and multiplying by 1, right? So if this is less over here, if 23, we know it's going to give us less gallon. If less, we know we are dividing by 115. So if less, more divides. 23 divided by 115 times 1. If this was, let's say, 200, or let's say even 205, 115 feet gives us 1 gallon. 205 will give us more, because 205 is bigger than 115. So if 205 is giving us more, then less divides. The lesser number of these two divides. That means the lesser number goes under 205. So it's going to be 205 divided by 115, and then you end up multiplying by what's on the right. So in both cases, based on whether this number is big or smaller than, in both cases, no matter what, we're always dividing by 115, and then ending up multiplying by what's on the right, which is 1. So in the way to calculate the gallons over here is we are going to pass in the total square feet as an argument to this method, and then we're going to have it stored in over here. Okay, we're going to have it stored in total square feet here, and then we're going to always divide by 115 and multiply by 1. So that's a formula to calculate that. All right, so I'll just keep this here for reference, and we can get back to it. But at every time, we are always dividing by 115 and multiplying by 1. So the calculate gallons of paint required, I didn't specify the return type. We are going to return something. Once we calculate the gallons of paint required can be a double value, because, for example, we can have 2.5 gallons, right? That's 2.5 gallons. It can be, although when you think of it, you can think of it as an int, but when we do the calculation, we can end up getting a decimal. So because of that, I'm going to return a double. I'm going to say the return type is a double because we can return a decimal value. So public static double, I'm going to call it calculate gallons of paint required. I'm going to need a variable. In this case, I'm going to need an argument passed into this method, and that argument is going to be the total square feet. Okay, the total wall space. Now, just to be consistent, you can call this get total square feet if you want. But it's, when you think of it, it's actually getting the total wall space in square feet. That's why I just declare this as square feet, but you can declare this as wall space. Maybe I should, but I'm just going to keep it like this. All right, so calculate gallons of paint required is going to need the total square feet over here. So I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to just change the variable names just so it's consistent. So I'm going to change this to wall space, and change this to total wall space. Let's just keep in mind that it's in square feet, and then we will be fine. And over here, I'm just going to be wall space, and over here it's going to be total wall space. Okay, just so now it makes sense, because now we're getting the total to wall space, and we are returning the total wall space. Let's just keep in mind that it's in square feet. Now it makes sense. It's the same thing, we just change the variables. So calculate gallons of paint required is going to need the total wall space. Okay, that's in square feet. So I'm going to now pass in the total wall space. And over here now it's going to be total wall space. Like that. Total wall space in square feet. All right, in square feet. So total wall space is what's going to be, I need to define the parameter. It's going to be a double that's going to be passed into this method as an argument. So in order to calculate the total, in order to calculate the total, calculate gallons of paint required, we are always dividing the total wall space by 115 and multiplying by 1. Okay, but 115 multiplied by 1 is the same. Total wall space divided by 115 multiplied by 1 is the same as total wall space divided by 115. We don't need it times 1. I'm just going to put it there just because it's part of this formula. Okay. All right. So to calculate the gallons of paint required, we're always going to divide the total wall space. Oops, sorry about my typing. Total wall space by 115. And since I want this calculation to take effect first, I'm going to surround them with parentheses, and we are always going to end up multiplying by 1. We don't have to put the multiply by 1 there, but I just put it there just because it's in this formula, just so we can understand where these numbers are coming from. And this formula, this calculation is basically going to result in the gallons of paint required. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to define a variable here, and I'm going to call it. It's going to be a double because again, this gallons of paint required can result in a double. It can result in a double. So double gallons of paint. I'm using the full name. Gallons of paint required. And gallons of paint. I spelled it wrongly. Gallons of paint required now is going to be equal to this formula. Okay. All right. Now, once we have the gallons of paint required, we can go ahead and return it because we're going to need it. So we're going to return gallons of paint required like this. All right. So now we've created this method, the number of gallons of paint required. The next one is the hours of labor required. Okay. So we still have the same parameters here. We still have the same parameters to calculate calculate the hours of labor required. Now the question said for every 115 square feet of wall space, 1 gallon of paint and 8 hours of labor will be required. So basically for every 115 square feet, 8 hours of labor will be required. 115 square feet, we're getting 8 hours of labor required. So based on the total wall space in square feet that we give to this function that we're about to create, or that we give to this method that we're about to create, we can basically use the same idea. If 115 square feet is equal to 8 hours, then the total wall space is going to be equal to what? We're going to use the same idea. So I'm going to go ahead and create a very similar method. I'll delete the content of it, so don't worry about it. I'll delete the content for now. I'll just leave the comment in here, change a few things here. So it's going to also return a double because hours can be 2.5 hours or 2.3 hours. It can return a double based on the calculation we give to it. So that's why I'm setting the return type to a double. And over here, I'm going to change the name to calculate hours of labor required. Sorry, my typing it's not good. So we are calculating the hours of labor required. So calculate hours of labor required, and hours of labor required is going to need the total wall space argument passed into it, because we're going to need that variable. So if 115 square feet this time around is equal to 8 hours, because over here it says for every 115 square feet of wall space, 1 gallon of paint and 8 hours of labor will be required. So if 115 square feet is equal to 8 hours, same idea, then the total wall space is equal to what? So the total wall space is, let's say, 45. If the total wall space is equal to let's say 45, 115 square feet gives us 8 hours. If 115 square feet gives us 8, then 45 is obviously going to give us less hours because 45 is less than 115. So ratio and proportion. If 45 is going to give us 45 square feet is going to give us less hours, then more divides. And what I mean by more divides is the bigger number of these two, the more number of these two goes under 45, and you end up multiplying by what's on the right. So it's going to be 45 divided by 115 times 8. Now keep in mind that we are dividing by 115 here when the number is less. What if the number is big, like let's say 245 square feet? If 115 square feet is equal to 8 hours, then 245 square feet is going to obviously give us more hours. So if more, ratio and proportion, if more, less divides. If less, more divides. Okay, so if more, less divides. If less, more divides. So if 245 is going to give us more, then less divides. The lesser number of these two, which is 115, goes under 245. That's what I mean by less divides. The lesser number goes under 245, and you end up multiplying by what's on the right, which is 8. Now again, with this one, also realize that we are always dividing by 115 no matter what, no matter whether this number is less or more, and multiplying by 8. So if this number is 10, 115 gives us 8, 10 gives us less. If less, more divides. The bigger number divides. So 10 divided by 115 times 8. If this is 189, 115 gives us 8, 189 is going to give us more. As if more, then less divides. The lesser number of these two, 115, divides, meaning it goes under 189. So it's going to be 189 divided by 115 times 8. Now, no matter what happens, we're always dividing by 115 and multiplying by what's on the right, which is 8. So that's the formula we have. So we are calculating the hours of labor required, and we're going to need the total wall space. All right, so in order to calculate the hours of labor required, I'm going to set up the formula. We're always dividing by 115. We're always dividing the total wall space by 115. And I'm going to surround these with parentheses because I want them to take effect. First, I'm following the order of operation. And we're always multiplying by what's on the right, which is 8. And this is basically going to calculate the hours of labor required. We need a variable to hold that. So I'm going to go ahead and define a variable. I'm going to, and again, since I said it can return a double value for the hours, I'm going to define a double variable called hours of labor required. And hours of labor required is going to hold the hours of labor required. Once we calculate this, okay, that this is basically going to calculate the hours of labor required. We need a variable to store it, and this is the variable, hours of labor required. So hours of labor required is going to now hold the the calculation that results in the hours of labor required. Okay, it's going to hold basically the result. Okay, result from the calculation that calculates the labor required, hours of labor required. All right, so now once we have the hours of labor required, we should go ahead and return it. Return hours of labor required, because we're going to need it. But once we call it, we're going to need that value once we call it. So my typing is not good. So go ahead and return hours of labor required, and now we're done. So now we've created 2 methods over here. I mean, overall we've created like 1, 2, 3, 4 methods, but based on these bullets, we've created 2 out of them. Okay, now the next thing is the cost of the paint. Now when you think about it, the cost of the paint, the question said it should also ask over here. The question said, write a program that allows the user to enter the number of rooms to be painted and the price of the paint. All right. Now, we know the user is going to give us the price of the paint. Over here, we are asking the user to enter the price of the paint. So we're going to get the price of the paint, and we're going to also get how many paints are required. So over here, how many gallons of paint required. So we are over here, we're calculating the gallons of paints required. It's going to be returned. So we're going to have, first of all, the price of the paint, a gallon of paint. So let's see. Over here, it says, entered allows the user to enter the number of rooms to be painted and the price of the paint per gallon. So basically, the price per gallon of the paint, the price per gallon, right? So we're going to get the price per gallon here. So where is it? Get paint price. Okay. We can even call this method get paint price per gallon, just so we know. Now adding the name here doesn't change anything. We haven't called it yet, so this is just defining the method. I'm just calling it get paint price per gallon, so we know that that's the price per gallon. So we're going to get the price per gallon. We're going to calculate the gallons of paint required. Now, if we know the gallons of paint required and we know the price per gallon, then that's going to give us the cost of the paint. Okay, the cost of the paint is going to be how many gallons of paint we're buying and what's the price of each. So let's go ahead and create a method that's going to calculate that. So I'm going to call this, it's going to be a public static method, and it's going to return the price. No, not the price. It's going to return the cost of the paint. So the cost of the paints, we know that's a monetary value. That's a dollar, a real monetary value, like a money amount. So it can be $45.25. And so since that can be a double, like for example, a decimal 45.25. Since we're going to return that value, let's set the return type of this method to a double. So public static double. And I'm going to go ahead and call this method. This method is going to basically calculate the cost of the paint. So calculate cost of paint. Okay, yeah, calculate cost of paint. Cost of paint. Now, cost of paint is going to take accepting a couple of arguments. Let's see. We know that we are going to get the price of the paint. So we're going to need that to calculate that. We're going to need the price of the paint, and the price of the paint is also a double variable, because that amount can be, let's say, $2.50. It can be a double. It can be a decimal. So double price of paint. We are going to need that. So I'm defining the parameter, and the user has to provide that when they call this calculate cost of paint method. So if you're giving me the price, now you also have to tell me. The user has to tell me, or the person calling this method has to tell me how many gallons they're getting. Oh, and over here we're going to calculate the Over here we're going to calculate the gallons of paint required. So we're going to use this method. We're going to call this method to calculate the gallons of paint required. I have the price. I also need the gallons of paint required. And the gallons again can be a double amount. They can be 2.5 gallons. Because over here the gallons of paint required is going to return a double, and it can be 2.5 gallons. So we're also going to need the gallons of paint required. Oops. And once the user has provided the gallons of paint required and the price of paint, we are going to go ahead and calculate the cost of paint. We know the price, we know the gallons of paint required. So I'm going to multiply the gallons of paint required times the price of the paint. And this calculation here is going to result in basically the cost of the paint. So I'm going to define a variable here. It's going to be a double variable, and since that variable is going to hold a cost, it's going to hold a money amount. Let's say $45.02. That can be a decimal. That's why I'm defining it as a double. I'm declaring it as a double. So double, I'm going to call it cost of paint, like this. And this cost of paint is going to hold basically this calculation, which is going to calculate calculate for the cost of paint. So cost of paint is going to hold the result of this calculation, which is calculating for the cost of the paint. And once we have the cost of the paint, let's go ahead and return it. Let's return cost of paint this way. All right, so now we're done with that method. All right, the next one is labor charges. All right, labor charges. Okay. Now labor charges, let's see. So think about it. Over here, the question said a painting company has determined that for every 115 square feet of wall space, 1 gallon of paint and 8 hours of labor will be required. And 8 hours of labor will be required. All right. Now over here it says the company charges $18 per hour for labor. The company charges $18 per hour for labor. All right. Now over here we have calculated the hours of labor required. And over here it says the company charges $18 per hour for labor. So we know that for every hour the company is charging $18. And over here we've calculated the hours of labor required. So all we have to do is multiply the hours of labor required times the price that the company charges per hour. The hours that of labor required plus the price the company charges per hour to get the labor charges over here.